Hello comic book fans, here's Earl Grey. Today I want to talk about the very first issue of the series that is closest to my heart, Love and Rockets. What you see right here are two variations of the first issue here. This is the second edition, and that one here with a bit changed color scheme, so this lady in the left turns black in the meantime. This is the third edition. There was a self-published one before. This one here with a quite minimalistic cover from Gilberto and a back cover from JAIME with Hopey, Maggie and Penny Century. By the way, they kept all this shtick here when all through the series, when JAIME did the front art, Gilberto did the back cover, and vice versa. That issue here, issue 2, that's been handled with in a later video, because in this thing here is so much stuff that has been to be shown and discussed that this video will be too long if I would talk about the second issue as well. So let's put this one aside and talk a bit about Love and Rockets issue 1. With a foreword by Gary Groth. I'm pretty sure that this wasn't in the first edition of issue 1. It starts with the very bold statement almost, bam, with a panel that doesn't really make sense story-wise, but serves as good black and white art and some atmospherical introduction to a story that starts with the word meanwhile. And I mean, you know, when a self-published comic throws you right in its first iteration amidst in the story and starts with meanwhile, this is some kind of meta approach, and it will continue this kind of meta approach, playing with narratives that were used again and again before, but create something new out of it. Almost a satire, but for the most part a really satisfying story, and if you go with it on a ride, you will have a ride. There are a lot of characters thrown in that will be killed off or never mentioned again, like this little clown dude here, Bob Zitz. And I think this guy will never appear again in that story. She will appear a lot again in the Gilberto cosmos. That's Luba. I mean, she doesn't really look like in later comics, but her most prominent features, so to speak, are already there. And she's written a bit out of character. She wants to be the queen of the Ovo Islands and stuff like that. But it's pretty interesting that Luba is already in this first issue, where Gilberto is playing around with comic tropes in a very satisfying manner, in my opinion. Here's Luba again, drawn a bit differently, but she's having already her hammer in her hand. And this hammer has some mystic appeal. It's always the question why she bears this hammer, and maybe it's a comment on her outward appearance, which is just hammering or stuff. But I think it's interesting to see that this hammer thing here is rooted in this bit mysticistic way in the first story, because the story gets more ambiguous with each page towards the end, in a good way. I really like the story. The BAM story is not the only story that is in this issue 1. There's an Ines and Bang story as well, some kind of road movie-like trip of the two girls through post-apocalyptic sci-fi setting, pretty mysterious, sometimes really hilarious. They are riding this animal called Vertigo, and it's not as good as BAM, but it's a really fun story. And what you don't find with later Gilberto stories are these small panels to put a lot of story in it. And you really can tell that he's telling the story as he's drawing it. So it has this flow of consciousness. And you can tell that these characters here are in Gilberto's mind for a longer time, as you can see older sketches in the Love and Rocket sketchbook number 1 and even comics. This appeared in a no-sex fanzine, I think around the 70s it has to be, and yeah. Here are already Ines and Bang in this. By the way, this first issue came out in the fall of 1982, and we still have yet to talk about JAIME's contribution to that issue. And this was, right off the bat, a Maggie and Hopey story. You can see them here in the first panel. There appears Hopey, and the fair-haired one in the front is Maggie. We still can assume that they are just friends, not lovers, because Maggie has this knack for this hots for a solar mechanic. This is a kind of sci-fi world, and in which or parallel universe in which these mechanics are some kind of rock stars, and Maggie has the hots for this Rand Race guy here, who became later on more and more of a side character and vanishes into the background. But here in the first issue he is pretty important. And what we can see here right in the start, that JAIME already is at the top of his game. Not really at the top, but we can see on each page that he draws here that he gets more and more confident with his art and storytelling. Even though there are some panels that don't look, and faces that don't really look like the master that is JAIME today. And all in all, the drawings from Gilberto here and JAIME looked very similar in the beginning at some places. But I will show you a story later on. Oh, here's Penny Century. We even have her later fiancé Costigan, that milliardaire, who will eventually make her a superhero. Yeah, a lot of threads are already laid out that will be continued in later issues. But as to the art of JAIME, here's a story that you may know already from later collections, How to Kill A, by Isabel Rubens, which is a story about how, I suppose, about how Izzy looks for and gets some inspiration for a story to write. And not that this story is just very surrealistic and very interesting in terms of storytelling. It is art-wise a real milestone, I think, in JAIME's use of black and white and using influences like, for instance, here on the left, Möbius and even wrestling and all these tropes that later are so important for the comics from the Hernandez brothers. This is a very dreamlike, surreal, like I said it, short story. After reading this story, which is only 4 pages long, you will definitely have no doubts about the storytelling and artistic abilities of JAIME Hernandez. But maybe the most interesting contribution of JAIME for this issue is Locas Tambien, a short story in which we can see how Maggie and Hopey rock the library and visit Izzy, that Isabel Rubin, but here she's not that well, and she becomes really a psycho who rambles about the importance of the nails in the bookshelf and stuff like that, creeping out to a fair amount, especially Joey, Hopey's little brother. And that's very well done with the shadow of Izzy in the background here. But most important, we get a flashback in the story here with a more healthy Isabel / Izzy taking Maggie to Hopey. And this bald girl here is Hopey. She got detention in school and is pretty angry about that and starts to tearing the principal's office apart. So we get really a more than just good glimpse on Hopey's punkish attitude. The more fun and interesting it is that she is a teacher now in her older age in the recent issues. So again, not every face is really drawn right and not masterfully as JAIME can do it today. But here in the last panel we get one of these punk panels, punk scenes that JAIME does so well. Even though, again, some faces are not as good as JAIME would do it today, I think. So a lot of stuff is going on in this first issue. Really a sensational start, I think. Even though both JAIME and Gilberto aren't at the peak of their abilities yet. So therefore I think it's reasonable that this stuff wasn't included in the first tome of Lucas, the collection of Maggie and Hopey stories here. That started with stuff from issue 2. And since the world of Palomar didn't play any role here in this issue, even though we get a glimpse at Luba, but Palomar didn't happen in this first issue. So it isn't included, nothing of this issue is included in this tome here neither. But the stories were, of course, collected in Music for Mechanics. This is book 1 of the trades with Love and Rocket issues that Fantagraphics put out. In the first and second edition, it wasn't called Music for Mechanics. That came later on, starting with the third edition, just for you Love and Rockets maniacs who want to know everything about every edition. Maybe I can deliver some stuff of that in these videos as well here. In these trades, these stories were presented in a different order, starting with JAIME Hernandez, Maggie and Hopey, later on there's the Gilbert stuff, the BAM storyline. So the stories from Gilbert and JAIME don't alternate with each other like in the first issue, but were collected in a run of sorts. And Titan Books collected Mechanics, the JAIME Hernandez stories, starting with the stuff from issue 1 and up to Maggie and Hopey stories from the following issues. And in a similar fashion it was collected, of course, in the one of these trades that and like in this volume here, it was collected in a similar fashion in one of these Love and Rockets trade paperbacks. But both of these books have the disadvantage to showcase all the stuff here in a smaller format. And especially since the first stories are pretty dense in terms of storytelling and in terms of texts, I really recommend to hunt down the bigger magazine-sized stuff, even though it is not so easily available today. So, I think that's enough for today. Thanks for listening and watching. Goodbye.